Welcome all of you once again. Very excited to have our common friends and people who like our platform with the kind of speakers that we have been curating over the last 22 weeks. This is our 22nd webinar. I'd like to thank each one of you for joining in and trusting us to get some unique insights on entrepreneurship, sales leadership, and on growth marketing. So today we have Anurag as well, who's joined us from Singapore. Anurag is the general manager APAC and Japan from Waymo. And before I jump in and give his introduction, let's jump in and hear it from him. Without further ado, Anurag, welcome once again. Thank you so much for coming on to PitchCamp. We have had Roshan to be part of this series from your marketing leadership team. Very excited to hear your thoughts. I know you're in Singapore. It's getting it's right into your evening, so appreciate you taking time and being on PitchCamp.
No, my pleasure, Bimlesh. Thank you again for having me here. Really nice, and thank you everyone for joining. Hopefully the session will try and keep it interactive, and if we can have a conversation, will be great value for even me and part of the reason I was telling Bimlesh, let's not do presentations is because we would like it to be more conversational in nature. Quick background for me, I've mostly been in technology sector for more than 17 plus years. I've been running large teams for about 7 plus years now. It's always been in technology companies. So sales largely started off with Microsoft. I worked with HCL, with a German company called Software AG, Kofax in the US, again, a US company. And after I'd worked in a lot of these corporates, I got connected to the CEO of Waymo, which is a Bangalore headquartered company, was a Bangalore headquartered company through a common VC friend. And it started off with more of exploration of the markets outside of India, but very quickly it turned into, why don't you come and join us and head sales for us? I thought the product was very fascinating and wanted to get the startup experience, which I've definitely got. I've lost more than half my hair, but it's been a fascinating journey in the last 2.5 years. I've been with Waymo. I started as the first employee outside of India, and I think we have tripled our revenues in India alone, and we have expanded into 7 other countries. We raised a Series B from Sequoia Capital and Emergence Capital last year. So we moved our headquarters to the US on the back of that. And yeah, we generally been growing about 2x every year. So it's a good story, and I work with a very good, passionate bunch of people from all across the world, and we're all having fun together and learning. With every mistake we make as well, we learn.
Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Anurag. I think what you said was critical. I think at the time when you guys started, there were really few companies, that were getting built from grounds up from India and trying to sell SaaS at an enterprise level in India and outside India, right? And kudos to you and the team at Waymo to have reached this milestones of growth.
No, thanks a lot. Yeah.
So fantastic. So jumping in, today's topic is going to be on revenue management for high growth in B2B enterprise startups. So talk to us about the journey from a sales professional perspective, right? So I think most of our topics are going to be around kind of mirroring your journey when you joined at Waymo and taking through that forward, right? So breaking that down into what was the state when you came in, and what were some of the things that you saw from a sales point of view, the customer profile, the target markets, positioning, sales decks, and so on and so forth. So talk us through that process, and we'll take it forward from there.
Yeah, sure. So I joined, as I said, about 2.5 years ago, and Waymo was already there for about 4 plus years. when I joined them. But the first 1 year, they were kind of trying to find out, what will work, what will not work. And post that, Yamini, who's a CEO, and Venkat, who's a CTO, they were batchmates in engineering, and then they went, business to McKinsey, Yamini and Venkat to Google. And so, when they got together to create Waymo, it was a confluence of very complementary skills. So they did a fantastic job in building out the product in India with some of the key customers that we had already. So when I joined, the base was already there in India, right? And there were a bunch of conversations that were happening in Asia, but it was all done remotely, right? And people would fly in, fly out. And most of the folks who were doing this didn't really come with the Asia experience before. And I think that's really where we said, okay, let's get together and see how we can grow this. To your point, at one point I never thought about was sales decks, right? And I remember since you brought it up, it was very the messaging that we had 2.5 years to the messaging that we have now is like poles apart, right? And it continues to evolve with every quarter, every year as well. Um, I think so. Some of the things that I thought we'll talk about, right, is the evolution of generally how we have also gone from getting into the market, right? We, as a company, it was quite fortunate because Yamini was like a born salesperson because she, in fact, Emergence Capital, for example, we are the only company that they've invested in which is in Asia Pacific. All their other companies that they've invested in were US headquartered. And these
Okay.
are the guys who are backing Zoom and Viva CRM and a bunch of other key companies. So she knows how to get to, she sells really at the top, being ex McKinsey, right? She's good at that. But when you talk about complex sales process, research shows that you have to cover at least 10.5 people is what they say on average. So between 10 to 11 people per enterprise, especially if you're in focus on the enterprise space, right? Which requires you to have salespeople to actually do it, right? And when I joined, I think we had two salespeople in India. So we have grown that team as well, and we are now a team of about 17 odd sales folks across these 6, 7 countries. Um, and the evolution of who we are after also has changed as well. And I'll give you a quick. Maybe I should have done this earlier, but very quickly, what we do as a company is we sell to large organizations who have distributed field sales teams, and we become a mobile solution for them to actually be able to manage their sales activities better. And that is the platform that we provide, and then we customize and configure that platform for various customers, and we make them more productive. And there's a lot of analytics that goes into providing them that productivity gains.
Fantastic.
Because of the nature of what we sell, large sales field teams are mostly found in financial services companies, right? So banks and insurance companies have become our mainstay. But when I speak about evolution, that is not how we started, right? Especially when you get into new territories. When we were in India and we first set up Singapore, the immediate thought process was, okay, we have to go and sell to people who have sales teams. So the thought process was, let's go calling onto those folks. There is a hit somewhere, let's sell it, right? And we made some mistakes along the way, and we further refined the ideal customer profile as we moved along. So, for example, the first customer we had in Singapore was a very heavy, which meant that they mostly use the portal more than the app. And as a company, we were always very focused on app, right? So that really made us realize, okay, this is not a good use case, right? So we need to move on. So we further refined that use case further down to, let's talk about field sales only. Now, field sales for us, we started looking at a lot of other industries. We looked at telcos. We looked at, did a lot of work with startups because startups sometimes have field sales people who are moving around. But very quickly, you start eliminating, right? Okay, B2B is not where we are strong at. Non-financial services is not where we are strong at because of various reasons. They either have legacy software, the way their salespeople work is not our ideal customer profile. And over time, what we have done is we have brought it down to a level where we are very clear about who is our ideal customer profile, right? And it's not easy. So that's my, for people who are starting off on this call and who have been struggling with that, it's very, when there's an interest shown by someone, right? It's very easy to go out and say, uh, yeah, this is what I do, this is what I have, and you start spending a lot of sales energy with them, but then a lot of that pipe will get dropped off. So one of the things that you have to start, but at least we used to keep thinking about, was how do we make sure that the conversion rates are becoming better and better over time, right? And the way to do that is to make sure that the quality of pipe that we're creating top of funnel is good quality. And we've had various measures that we've put in place to be able to do that. One of that is identifying the ideal customer profile. And there are other various measures like account-based marketing and being very selective about the kind of folks that we push through the funnel. So we
Right.
see much more deal conversions as well. So that's like the first thing I wanted to touch upon.
Fantastic. Awesome. So I think So give us an example of your current. How does your current ideal customer profile look like now?
So, good question. I mean, if I were to put it as an elevator pitch, right, it's like uh, we focus on distributed field sales teams in financial services companies who have high velocity sales processes, right? So, what that means
Okay.
is we don't even, and that's a very good question because in your defined customer segment, maybe not every line of business is going to be relevant, right? So, you also have to start defining who is it that you're after. So for example, when we go and sell to a bank, we know off the bat a private banking use case is not relevant for us because they don't do high velocity sales. They maybe
Right.
do two meetings a week with the, customers who have, millions of dollars, right? So, and most of the deals are on a golf course or on a yacht. So it's not something that we fit in with. But priority banking, or relationship management at a branch banking level, those are things that we could potentially look at. So so we have to start defining and refining the ICP, and this is also very dependent on the kind of market that you need to focus on, especially if you're looking to get out of focus outside of India, right?
Got it. Absolutely. So so by the time when Vimo was getting customers in India, and you joined in, and this refinement started to take place. At what time during this journey that you zeroed in on that you need to focus on financial services primarily as your primary target market or your primary ICP, and then have the adjacent ones come in naturally? When did that focus shift happen?
So, I would like to say there's a lot of science behind it, but frankly, it was just purely by method of elimination. And
Okay.
I wish there was some science behind it. And this is my learning. In fact, one of the things that I always think back when I look back at these learnings on, what we could have done better, I really feel spending some time doing a little bit of market research and identifying a very clear ICP, ideal customer profile, is extremely important, because what you don't want to be doing is hitting out and learning through failure, right? If you can avoid those falls, it's better for you.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thanks for this insights, Anurag. Talk to us a little bit about your inside sales approach on you're selling to enterprises. I do know that in India you were pretty active across all the marketing face-to-face industry forums. You had a you know I used to be in touch with Roshan, so I know that you guys were very active in the exhibition space as a channel to to meet your potential customers. So, what were some of the other methods that you enabled to enhance the true lead generation or to create demand? Was it predominantly the exhibitions as a channel, or you also had your own field sales teams to kind of go out and meet these enterprise customers in the financial services?
Yeah. No, so great question. So one of the things, and this kind of goes hand in hand with identifying the ICP, right? because moment you realize what ICP is, you need to be focused on whether, and if you think about it, right, there's these SMEs, there's the mid market, there's the enterprises, and there are different different strokes for different folks, right? If you think about even the way Salesforce grew, it was all SME mid market till maybe about 7-10 years ago is really when they started focusing on enterprise. Before that, it was always SME and mid market, right? And a lot of companies do that. So it depends on where you want to start off from, and there are pros and cons, right, based on your product fitment. uh, what I have realized is, at least for the product that we had, the cost of sales was roughly the same, irrespective of whether you sell to a mid market or so. SME was something we were anyway not fit for purpose, but when we sell to a mid market or we sell to an enterprise, it made just more sense for us from a customer lifetime value and the whole, the CLV to CAC ratio kind of thing. It just made sense for us to focus on enterprise. So that refined our inside sales philosophy as well. Because when we are looking at minimum 11 touch points in an enterprise for going and doing a complex sales process, you need coverage as well, right? So we need to be able to
Right.
go out and talk to different people and all that. So how do you define the metrics for inside salespeople? Is it based on just meeting setup? Is it based on opportunities created? Is it based on funnel movement or closures? And that gets refined over time as well, right? And again, it really depends on what you're looking to optimize your inside sales funnel for, right? And but that's also kind of the what metrics that are set in place and what behaviors they drive. So as we realized, for example, our journey was that we realized that okay, we want to just focus on named accounts, right? Now, if I've got 20 named accounts, I cannot possibly be having people just talking about pipeline being created, right? Because if it is an inside salesperson and he's managed to get these 11 or 12 people assigned, he's got meetings for the salespeople over there, but the pipe is still the same, right? So can you penalize him on not generating enough pipe, right? And we
Right.
and they were so I think inside sales was one of the place where we went through the most iterations in the last how many, about 12 quarters, right? We've had
Right.
different KRIs, different KPIs. We've iterated with that, and finally we have come to a point where we have kept a very very optimized inside sales function. And since Roshan, we've kind of moved it within a function called demand generation, and demand generation is basically anything to do with top of funnel. So we try and
Right.
run a lot of above the line, below the line kind of marketing activities, which for inbound, it basically is pushed into these inside sales teams, which is a very limited number of team, right? And they then help in generating the reach outs into the existing pipe within a certain account or within these named accounts. The other thing that we've realized over time is that in a lot of the countries that you want to get out into, right, having a local inside sales just makes a lot of sense, really. Um, and some of the countries, it's just especially if you're selling to mid market or enterprise. SME is again a different ball game, but if you're selling to mid market or enterprise, just think about it, right? The number of companies that are existing in software or services in India, and all of them have inside sales functions, and all of them are calling the same list of companies that you are identifying and targeting, right? So I mean, you sometimes speak to a CIO or a head of business, for example, and they sometimes get like 20 calls a day, right, or 20 messages a day asking them for, do you have a problem I can solve, or do you have 5 minutes where I can block time with you, right?
Right.
So even the messaging and all that, and that's a separate session. We can always talk a little bit about that. One of the things we tried to do to even improve the rate of conversion was improving was changing the messaging that we were actually writing in the initial outreach emails. Um, but all that has kind of got refined over time. So we have come to a point where we are now very focused on account-based marketing, mostly catering to qualifying inbound leads, and then focusing on localized regional inside sales to facilitate meetings for the sales teams.
Wonderful. It's excellent. Talk to us a little bit about the the channel partner ecosystem, right? When do you start building your partnerships? As a growth stage startup, does it help to build it too early in your life cycle, even before you build out your sales team, or or you have seen great results when you have a lot more clarity on who your ICP is, or when you're trying to reach out to markets where you don't have presence? What has been your experiences, and your some of your lessons learned from that space?
Yeah, no, it's a good question because I've been in Singapore for like 13 years now. I've been covering the Asia market for that much time, and it surprises me how even after so many years of Asia Pac experience, I still come across so many partners who keep promising the world, right? And sometimes you get duped by it. You'll find a partner who promises to take you into a Philippines or a Myanmar or something and says, oh, I got 50. I got a call once from a guy who said, I know everyone in Fiji, and we can just go ahead and cover the market and everything. So I think this the fundamental, which is why I started the conversation with ICP, right? I think finding out the your sweet spot, making sure that you understand what you want to achieve, right, in that particular market, which are the key customers you're really after. I think that's a really good starting point. And the other thing that we have started getting into is looking at account-based partnerships. So what I mean by that is once you have say a named list of accounts, right? It's not that difficult to be able to figure out through different ways and means who are the key system integrators, who are the key people. For example, if it's a bank which has implemented, Infosys core banking, so Infosys is an existing partner. Then all you need to do is
Right.
look at, okay, Infosys is working with which local system integrator. So it's very easy to find out, okay, this local system integrator is clearly entrenched in that account. Then you kind of call them up and try and see what you can do with them, which are the other accounts that they have, right? So there are smarter ways of kind of wading, shifting through the weeds, if you will, from each of these countries and identifying the right reselling partner, the right referral partner, and you got to have different percentages for this. Referral basically means I'll introduce you, but I don't want anything to do with the contract or support. Reseller basically means I will bundle you and I will be your front face. I'll handle L1 support and I'll manage everything for you in this customer and couple of key customers. And yeah, the third category I've found are rainmakers, advisors. So that's something that we are thinking of quite seriously. Especially, and again, our business is different, especially because we're very focused now on very few key named enterprises. I mean, and that's really our growth. So for that, we need strong rainmakers, right? In some of the markets that we operate
Right.
in. Uh, but so you may want to look at that, and obviously a partner strategy is very dependent upon how open is the platform that you have created as well, right? If your self-service is or your administration console is not that well refined where partners can build something on top of it, um, then maybe it can't be customized by partners, in which case they just become pure reselling partners, but they can't really do any implementation. So you need to be clear
Right.
about all of that when you have those conversations with the partners. How easy is it for your solution to be replicated by different partners in these local countries, right? Sometimes that's also a scary thing. Um, and from a partnership point of view, the last piece of learning that I've had, and not just in Waymo, but in other countries as other companies I've worked with as well, it's again the KPIs and the metrics that you look for measuring the success that you've defined for your partnerships, right? Cannot be pure revenue based in the first year. Because think about it, Bimlesh, you've also done a few startups. You go to a partner and says, okay, I want to be partners. Why don't you show me your list of customers and let's talk? No one does that, right?
Right.
No one wants to give you their customers. And even if they believe it's an amazing fitment for a complementary product, they will never voluntarily take you to their customers. So the first year, it's always about really just identifying this, one or two key opportunities that you can work on, make that a success, and then kind of build on top of it. So partnership in my head is a good strategic play, but it's a patient waiting game. And a lot of folks tend to miss this out, but at the same time, they're only also focused on strategy. So you got to find a line, a midline, and the midline is normally finding or isolating, identifying one or two customers that you can work on with that partner, make that a success, and then grow from there. I would never advise trying to work with a partner without having a reference customer to talk about.
Right. Absolutely. Fantastic. Do you also advise having some sort of a partner toolkit ready in terms of your preparedness to engage a partner so that the partner has a great onboarding experience, including training, collaterals, etc., etc. Right?
Yeah, so that's something we were never built for purpose on that, and we started a whole partnership function only last year. So December last year, we hired a senior gentleman who's running our Asia Pacific alliances, and he's built the entire partner onboarding and program from scratch. We are working with our product teams to also now create a complete certification program, right? In terms of what does it take for a partner to really get certified before they become a certain category, right? Silver, gold, platinum, whatever. We're obviously taking
Right.
inspiration from a lot of established software companies who are already doing that. So finding out these partner programs is also pretty straightforward. There's a lot of publicly available information on how you can onboard your partner and make their journey a more seamless to work with your product.
Fantastic. Great. Moving on, talk to us a little bit about cadence and forecasting. Where what are your touch points? From a sales point of view. One is internal cadence. Your sales reviews and something that you do with partners and with your customers, and then we'll get into forecasting.
Yeah, I think definitely goes hand in hand. You know, again, I was very fortunate. I started my sales career with Microsoft, and that set up a lot of. I was telling you, Bimlesh, the science of selling, right? So you understand. So to be able to understand what does the sales process look like, how do you progress from one sales stage to another? What should be the entry criteria for one sales stage? How do you move to another sales stage? And when I joined Vimo, that sales process was not there. So it was very much, it was literally run like a proper startup, right? It was a startup. And so one of the first few things I had to do was work with, get in sales ops and work with them to kind of try and put this whole sales process in place. And the sales process, we defined like a, 7-8 step sales process, 7-step process from initiation of a deal, which is an MQL to an SQL, marketing qualified lead to a sales qualified lead, and then validation, identification, solutioning, all the way to closure. And for each of the sales steps, we identified certain fields that are mandatory fields to get and certain activities that are mandatory activities to happen in that stage before it can be progressed to the next stage. So putting all this data in, underlying CRM is something that is obviously something that Cadence will drive. Uh, Now, what we do from a cadence point of view is, again, it depends on how you're looking to create as a sales plan for your salespeople, right? So I'll give you a simplistic example. If you have a sales guy who has to do 1 million in revenues, right? Typically, industry average, you need the guy or girl to have about 4.5 to 5 x is as the cover for them to be able to do 1 mil. Now, if you want to be able to do 4.5 to 5 mil in pipeline, you need to be able to do about 80 to 100K of pipeline addition per week, right? Very simple maths. So now, if you just get together with your sales teams or your inside sales teams every Monday and take a stock of all the activities that they did the previous week, the pipe that they added the previous week, and also review the activities that they're going to do that week, right? It gives a very simplified view of, have we been able to add enough pipe YTD for getting you to that number. And second is what are the activities that you're outlining for this week, so that next Monday when I talk to you again, I know what activities you have done, which have led to a pipeline addition, right? So to that extent, I look at activities as pipeline building activities and sales activities. Sales activities are those activities that are for existing sales items in pipeline or funnel. And pipeline building is for any activity to a prospect. It could even be a marketing event, right? But that's an activity. Now, from that
Right.
activity, has there something that's flowed in through the SQL, MQL, right? Um, and yeah, so once you measure that on a weekly basis, you realize that the engine keeps on going. So one of the things I never miss and I hate missing is my Monday cadence call. So I do cadence calls with all the different regions, with all the different regional sales teams. The sales teams are becoming bigger, so it's taking up a lot of my Mondays. But it really helps in driving the the science behind the selling, right? And people are constantly then filling up the pipe, and we know where and we know and this also in a way feeds forecasting, because you already know which regions are not able to add pipe and which are, and based on that then you can have a judicious view of where certain regions will end up as, and that influences forecasting. Forecasting for us, again, if you take a simplified view of forecasting, sorry, before that, cadence. So that's the weekly cadence, and then we try and do quarterly business review where we look at 2 quarters down the line, what is the pipe for or the commit pipe for the next quarter and the pipe after. So, in fact, last week we finished our QBRs for OND as well as JFM, which allows us to get a 6 monthly view of what the overall pipe looks like, so we can get a very realistic forecasting done on the current queue and get a rough idea of the Q plus one, right? So we have a good view of OND already. We have a decent view of JFM, and when we get into JFM, we'll have a good view of JFM as well as AMJ. So it's something like that. And
Okay. January, February, March, April, May, June.
correct. Sorry. Yes, that's right.
Sure.
Yeah. So
Wonderful.
and that kind of leads to the forecasting capabilities, right? Because when you're forecasting, then it's important to be able to look at deals at what stages, and what accuracy levels can you really say that, and what surety can you say that this is going to actually close, right?
Right.
Uh, so we look at deals only above say 80% can even be forecasted for that quarter. Otherwise, they can't even be forecasted. So we've got a rule against that, right? Similarly, only if it is between 60 to 80 can it be even put in best case. And the last is anything which is not in best case or commit should not be existing in the current quarter pipeline forecasting wise. So
Got
those are a few things. I got a few thumbs
it.
ups. Thanks.
Fantastic. So I think let's take a pause here and seek questions if there are any from the audience at this point in time on ICP, business development, getting your first few customers on board, and so on and so forth. Talk to us a little bit about the sales closing aspects of it. Right now your teams have done, that's always the hardest part, right? No matter what you forecast. I like the way that you said on focusing on a 2 quarter basis,
Hmm.
right? And not trying to extend beyond 2 quarters. So talk to us about your sales cycle, your duration, your average sales cycle, and what are some of the things that you have seen from a sales closure point of view, the challenges and some of your tactics that have worked.
Yeah. So again, it depends on how well do you actually use your CRM, because again the data is really I mean the devil's in the details, right? So if you can look at more data, the better it is. So one of the things, for example, is as I spoke to you about earlier, right? We try and put in two levels of activities. So there's sales activities and pipeline activities, and those get tagged to either an opportunity or an account. Now, when
Right.
I look at opportunities, I can then see the aging of the opportunities, and I can see the last activity or how many days since last activity on that particular opportunity or particular account. So that gives a very clear idea on how many weeks or months has it been for a particular account where no one's even spoken to them or touched base with them. And similarly, it also gives a view of what stage is a particular opportunity at before, since it's been touched, right? So if it's been 90 days and a particular opportunity is in the same stage, and it's been 70 days since there's been any activity against them, or even more than 30 days that you've done any activity against that opportunity, clearly it's not moving fast enough, right?
Right.
So that kind of helps me understand the velocity of the sales funnel. And it's a very grounded way of getting the velocity, because that helps you really identify which is the real opportunities and which are the ones which are just there for filler, right?
Right.
And that then helps in pushing it towards the closure side. And then you of course have to do what you normally do, right? Get involved in the high velocity moving opportunities, try and figure out what you can move from best case to commit, get personally involved. I mean, before COVID, I was literally in one country per week. It was quite crazy. So yeah, so the last 6, 7 months I've been grounded here, and this is a new reality of working with customers, pushing them for closure despite being remote, right? And the point is, I think what I've realized is, especially when you're dealing with sales teams, right? There is a little man-to-man mapping that is required. There is a little bit of a role definition that is required to be played out at. And simple examples, right? Now, now for whatever it's worth, if in a particular opportunity, my CEO has got exposed in that opportunity well ahead of time, they will only want to talk to the CEO. No one wants to talk to my sales guy or the sales director or to me or to anybody else, right? They'll bring your CEO, right? So there is this element where you have to be very clear in your accounts, who is mapped to who. So one of the starting points in any named account definition is always good to understand their org structure, identify who are the key people, those 10, 11 connections that you need to be able to close something, and who are the key people who should be engaging over there. And a combination of a bunch of this, and of course, our standard age old hustling, which is the art of selling, all of this will kind of come together and make the deal happen.
Fantastic. All right, we got two questions. Thank you, Smita and Karthik. Kudos to you. Question from Karthik. Penetrating to a new market via partnership sounds exciting and promising, but it isn't that straightforward, mainly due to lack of product awareness, language barrier, operational hurdles, and trust factor. How did you guys take care of it at Vimo?
Yeah, I mean, see, again, so I had a lot of local connects in different countries, so that kind of helped with the trust factor. But so Karthik, I see you with Exotel, right? So we in fact work with Exotel in a couple of banks in India, and I can understand what you're saying, right? Because when you talk to local partners, and it's sometimes very difficult to move the weeds away from the actual grain, because people are going to be constantly telling you about stuff that they can take care of. The simplest way I have seen now is to have that account-based strategy. So if you know which are the top 10 accounts you want to really get into that, suppose you're going into Vietnam, for example, right? And you know these are the top 10 accounts based on your research, based on your ICP. These are the top 10 accounts I really want to focus on. It's very easy to get some market research folks or some inside sales folks to very quickly pull out a list of all the system integrators, the key ISVs, the key resellers who really operate on those markets and who work with those accounts. And then of course you have to go there and you have to do what it takes, right? The standard, setting up the awareness and all of that stuff. The good news is most of the countries, at least now, are very open to. They always have, especially in alliances, they'll have somebody who really understands English, and even if the rest of the company doesn't, they'll always make sure that they're fairly open to doing that. In fact, that's maybe a first sign of knowing how open they are to partnering with you. But yeah, it's not been easy, and we have struggled a lot as well. We've had partners created where we've lost 2 3 deals in a row before we figured out that something wrong is going on with this partner. or we've had partners which on paper say that they're going to do really well. And like I said, even me being in Asia for so many years, sometimes I get clouded, right, in terms of which partner can actually do well for us. But so I think over time we just got extremely clear. The more refined the ICP can be, the more targeted your customers can be. Finding out those partners becomes that much easier.
Next question. How do you find new customers in the remote world?
Yeah, we covered quite a bit of that on the whole ideal customer profile bit. So I'll give you a simple example, right? When Vimo started off, and this will not be a repeat for the others, but when we started off looking outside of India, right? So Yamini, our CEO, she had sold to a couple of banks, insurance companies in India. We felt, okay, roughly we want to be with banks and insurances. Let's talk to them, right? And a lot of calls were made all over Asia. She used to fly in and out different countries. Pre-sales used to go in and out. And we identified a couple of key opportunities in Hong Kong and Singapore, which you would assume is a very good market to get in, right? Because it's Hong Kong and Singapore, very developed, and they should be able to be open to technology and things should move. Now, again, because our ICP was not very well defined, what we failed to realize, and this was before I had joined. So when I just joined and we started looking at this whole ICP refining, the first thing I looked at was what kind of customers are we really the strongest at, and what are the characteristics of those customers that have made us so indispensable to them, right? And the important thing was to then identify which countries are those similar kind of customers in. And to me, it was very evident when I joined that the most imminent markets for us should be the ones that mimic India, because India is where we have actually grown and our product is tested and tried, and it's been successful. So for me, in Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam was a no-brainer to immediately get into. So, and as it would have it, that's exactly where we have all our established customers in Asia. And despite 2 years of trying, Singapore and Hong Kong, we've still not closed any single deal. We don't have any customers there. Regional offices sit over there, but our product is not fit for purpose for these markets. That's something that we've realized for the in Asia. But in the same breath, our product is extremely fit for purpose for Japan, which is a developed market, but it's picked up like crazy over there in terms of interest and closures and all that. So there is a little bit of punting and trying to figure it out and hustling to figure out, in this remote world and new world, how do you go after those customers? But I think it really eventually comes down to having a very strong definition of your ICP, your ideal customer profile, and trying to figure out which countries does that ideal customer profile mimic. And the more targeted and focused you can get, the more success you're going to have. It's very easy to just go all over the place and say, oh, someone has an interest. And I look back 2.5 years, some of the companies that we have tried to close deals in, and which we've even closed deals in, and then they're pulled out after 6 months of working. It's just been crazy. Now I look back and think, why did we ever do those deals? It made no sense.
So SaaS is all about land and expand, right? So when we talk about this, especially with large enterprises, support is also becoming critical, and pre-sales is also critical on how do you customize a solution to their business use case, and make it feel that the solution solves their enterprise specific problems. So talk to us a little bit as to how you have made pre-sales, sales, and post-sales, which is customer success, work together to to manage renewals, to manage your pipeline to move through.
Yeah, sure. So I call this the Holy Trinity because I really believe, sales, technical pre-sales, and customer success, especially in a new territory, is extremely important. So we looked at, and this is like a pod of 3 people, right? So this also helps you identify which countries and territories you want to be in, because it's not that simple. And we made this mistake of opening, for example, when we started looking at Asia Pac, we set up in Australia, and we went and hired one salesperson there. But then we know this is not going to be the end, right? Because a salesperson at some point in the sales cycle will require a technical help. At some level during the deployment, you need customer success, project management coming in. So there are real costs that you have to think through when you're actually getting into a new territory. So in an existing territory like in India or wherever you're already at, right, it's very straightforward to continue to deliver and keep hiring based on requirements. But when we are getting into a new territory, these three really need to be something that you have projected for in your cash flow sheet, and you understand the rough costs of this, and in some cases you're even recovering these costs from the customer, right, from the initial customer. The other thing that I typically have done is we have never, we have only one instance where we've invested in a territory before a deal has been signed. So we have always tried to, which maybe goes back to Smita's question of remote selling as well. Flying in and out was something that we used to do, and only once we know we're close to a deal, and then that you have to kind of scale up in that geography. That's when we have done the local hiring, right? So that's something that we have done. And the other learning that I have had generally, if all of us are in the tech sector and building tech based products, um, sometimes whatever you're building is very very proprietary for yourself, right? And getting someone to technically learn that and articulate that to the customer and customize it for them is a challenge, right? And very few people get it, which is why they become the technical pre-sales, which who have to work maybe sometimes with your R&D team sitting wherever you are. So the big learning that we have had is generally local pre-sales does not work. So if you can still hire local sales, you can still hire local customer success. But my view now is, and I could be wrong, but my general view is local pre-sales doesn't work. It's easier to train pre-sales from India and have them fly in and out, or train them in India and relocate them to some other place, assuming you're an Indian startup, right? And yeah, and I think the only thing was that from a COVID, like before COVID hit, we were lucky because most of the regions were already staffed for us. Like I said, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore, Japan, US, we already had people. And when we looked at people, we looked at this pod of three people. So we already have that staffed, which has allowed us to continue local operations.
Fantastic. Cool. Talk to us a little bit about account management, uh, Anurag. How do you structure that?
Yeah.
You spoke about you know key accounts being managed,
Yeah.
account-based marketing strategy to acquire accounts.
Yeah.
So how do you structure your sales teams to chase after named accounts or even strategic accounts or new
Yeah.
logos?
Yeah.
How different are these? Are they the same? Are they different?
Yeah. So I've roughly found, see, all of us have to be in a constant mode of hunting, right? Even if you get into an existing customer, going and talking about a subsequent opportunity is also like hunting for business. So traditionally, all of us are hunters at heart, right? If we are getting as entrepreneurs or people who are building out businesses. The key difference that I've seen is when you get into farming, right, which is an existing customer, now you want to look at different lines of businesses, try and make them better. It's inherently important to start identifying people in your organization or maybe recruiting people who are more built grounds up in managing one customer where they really enjoy working with that customer, trying to make them successful as a customer from a business perspective. Now, why I'm saying business perspective is because typically, at least in a lot of SaaS companies, customer success has a huge role to play, especially when in terms of renewals, in terms of adoption, in terms of engagement. Um, and what we were very clear about when I joined, there was no customer success division. We didn't have anything. Part of the reason why we did not have a huge customer delight everywhere, we were always in a rush to close deals and deliver them and move on to the next one. So we had a bunch of those two sales guys that we had, really good hunters, but no one really who's sitting with the customer, making sure that they're helping them grow better. So last year we had a chief customer officer join us, and he's built out a whole customer success organization, right, which is the whole post sales kind of an organization. And one of the key distinctions is those people cannot be construed as sales. So under no circumstances does your customer success person should he or she be having a conversation on contracts, because the whole point of customer success is to be agnostic to contractual obligations and to just do what's right for the customer to succeed. Now, if there are contractual obligations or there are repercussions on on some sort of licensing or something, that is up for the salesperson to take over, right? And it is very difficult for us to find salespeople who are hunters, but at the same time they're very good at managing accounts as well and working hand in hand with a virtual team of customer success and solution delivery and pre-sales in increasing that account, right? So, and that again depends on your philosophy, right? In your company, like our company philosophy is to get into every account and try and increase our penetration across various lines of businesses and try and do whatever we can with that customer to get them to, in fact, customize more with them so that it's difficult. The cost of replacement becomes very difficult, right? In a way, to be frank about it. And for
True.
that, customer success is very important and account management is very important. And a lot of people use these terms interchangeably. I'm just drawing out the line. It's very important to be sure that your customer success team are pure evangelists and they're pure business oriented people who stay away from all sales conversations.
Got it. I think a related question has come up. What's the sales team size to customer success team ratio?
Depends on the stage that you're at. But if you get into a new territory, for example, I would actually feel from the first customer that you start engaging with, you need a customer success person, right? Now, do you really need a customer success person for the next 3 accounts? Maybe not, right? But then that's something you'll have to figure out based on the loading factor of per of the number of accounts to customer success and how much they get involved in every place. We typically look at about 3 or 4 customers per customer success person. And sales also is roughly in the same figure. So in some of so currently we have about 9 odd customer success folks and about 16, so about 1:2 is what I'm thinking of as a ratio.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Anurag. I think before we come to the end, I wanted to cover the last topic. Talk to us about renewals, right? About renewals is very vital for a SaaS company, right? And keeping the churn rates much lower, because your cost of acquisition of every enterprise customer is high, and you would want them to stick around with you for as long as possible. So,
Yeah.
what have been some of the strategies that have worked for you? What lessons you have also learned from these renewal cycles over these 4 years
Yeah.
that Vimo has been around?
Yeah, so sorry, there's just one question I'll quickly have. Timeline to crack a new account from your experience depends on the space. 6 to 9 months for enterprises, SMEs can obviously be lesser. But yeah, there are some enterprises, again, depending on which market you go into, it could be even 12 months to 18 months. So you need that much cash flow, you need that much patience to be able to manage that out. But yeah, covering the last topic on renewals, um, one of the things that I always felt we could do a little bit, we could have done always a lot better is just ensuring customer delight. From the time we actually start engaging with a customer, getting them really, really excited and happy about what we are doing, and then moving on. And that does impact renewals in some place. At the same time, having customer success brought in early, I think Smita had asked this question. If you bring in customer success earlier on into an organization or an engagement, what happens is you start driving that delight, and more importantly, you start measuring the ROI that you are having on that customer. right? What is the, because on paper, if they're paying you something, rest assured they're making 5 times more, right? And they'll never tell you that. But when you have customer success in there, you know the real trigger points, you understand the key value, you understand the journeys that they're taking with your solution, you understand the overall ROI and the business impact that your solution is having, right? Now, when it comes to renewal, the one of the key things is working maybe 6 months or maybe earlier than that in identifying what is the business impact and the value that you are driving, so that that can be championed maybe 3 months in advance or 4 months in advance before renewal. And this is something that will help you get a bump up in pricing or getting a bump up in the additions that they're using. So if they have a basic version of a software that they're using, you want to bump them up to something more. We have been very successful in doubling, tripling our ARR from customers purely on the back of being able to show them value, and saying that, hey, we're delivering value. These are the other things that we're going to give to you in the next 2-3 years. Make it worth our while, yeah. And it's a very healthy
Typically
conversation.
going for, do you typically go in for single year contracts? You go for multi-year, 3-year, 5-year contracts. What's your strategy to push?
So it's easier said than done to go in for a 3-year contract, unless it's like a PSU or it's an RFP situation where they ask for a 3-year contract, right? Where it's definite that they have this initiative, there's a 3-year budget assigned. So it depends again on what your software is or what kind of a startup you have. But typically, most companies I've seen are only happy giving a purchase order for 1 year, which is again
Okay,
pros and cons. Cons being it's a 1 year contract. Pros are that you can give a 1 year pricing, and if you've genuinely delivered value, second year you can figure out your pricing, right? A better pricing.
got it. Fantastic, Anurag. This has been awesome conversation with you. Yeah, we had this one question from Smita. As a sustainability startup, we are being told by a few Europe and US are a better market for us. Is remote selling possible and different from international markets? Do we necessarily need to build a local partner for sales?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the whole advisory based stuff, and it goes back to that whole target list, account based selling thing, which I was talking about. If you can identify your top 10 accounts that you want to get into in terms of a contract, and if you can figure out either rainmakers who are connected to those 10 accounts, or if you can figure out key resellers or referral partners that you can work with for those key accounts, that would be the only reason for going and making a partnership thing. Otherwise, doing a simple Google search and trying to reach out to as many partners is not a great strategy at all. And a lot of people will promise a lot of things, but things it just doesn't happen. The other thing that I would advise against is doing exclusivity partnerships.
All right. I think we'll come to the end of this webinar right now. And thank you so much, Anurag. It's been wonderful having this conversation with you.
My pleasure. Really
Uh,
nice talking to you. Thanks, Bimlesh.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Anurag, once again.
Thanks a lot, Bimlesh. Lovely talking to you.